My phone was silent for the third week. I set the cup of cold coffee on the windowsill and glanced at the screen again. No missed calls, no messages, or even notifications that I'd read my latest emails. Outside my Memphis apartment window, a light rain drizzled down, turning the October day into a gray, blurry picture that accurately reflected my mood of the past few months. I dialed a familiar number and listened to the long beeps. 1, 2, 3. Usually David picked up after the second, if he answered at all. Today the phone buzzed to the answering machine. "Hi, this is David Clark. Leave a message and I'll call you back," my son's voice said in a monotone. I dropped the call without leaving any words. What was the point of writing down another request for an appointment or a trivial health question when the previous 15 messages had gone unanswered? David is 38, head of development at a large IT company, lives in an upscale Nashville neighborhood with his wife Holly, who works at a marketing agency. They have it all: good incomes, a spacious house, new cars, and plans for the future. Only those plans don't include a 70-year-old father who lives 200 miles away and tries to remind them of his existence. I opened my laptop and logged onto social media. Holly's account was peppered with photos from corporate events, dinners at fancy restaurants, and weekends at the lake. David posted rarely, but when he did, he made sure to share successes at work or the purchase of another gadget. The last post was 2 weeks old, a picture of a new TV with an enthusiastic comment about the picture and sound quality. "Of course," I muttered, flipping through the feed. The TV was more important than my father. I closed the browser and pulled a notebook from my desk drawer, where I kept a record of my attempts to contact the family. The last entry was dated September 23rd, Holly's birthday. I'd sent her a gift card to an expensive boutique and a bouquet of flowers with a note, but I hadn't even gotten a formal thank you. Before that, there were gifts for David's birthday in August, an attempt to invite them to my own birthday dinner in July that was ignored, and several calls over the summer when I offered to visit or host them. Each attempt was met with a wall of polite indifference. David answered the phone with one-word answers. Holly pretended to be busy, and their plans together invariably boiled down to phrases like, "Dad, we're going through a very busy time at work," or "Maybe next time we'll get together." I got up and walked around the apartment, which seemed emptier and emptier every day. After my wife died 5 years ago, I had sold the large family home and moved into a more modest dwelling, thinking it would be easier to maintain a relationship with my son. Less hassle, more family time. How wrong I was. My wife was always the link between David and me. Mary knew how to find the right words, organize family gatherings, and maintain that warmth that makes relatives a real family. After she died, David came to the funeral, helped with the paperwork, even stayed for a few days to sort through Mom's things. At the time, I thought we had grown closer, that our shared loss had brought us closer together. But gradually, the calls became less frequent. The visits turned into rare and short meetings, and then stopped altogether. I picked up the phone again and texted, "David, how are you doing? Why don't we get together this weekend? I could come to Nashville, or you could come to my place." I sent it and watched as a delivered mark appeared at the bottom. A few minutes later, a read check mark was added, but there was no response. I remember how outgoing and open David was as a kid. We went to baseball games together, made birdhouses in the garage, played board games in the evenings. My son told me about everything: school, friends, first crushes. When did things change? Maybe when David went to university and immersed himself in his studies, or when he started building his career and every minute became worth its weight in gold. Or maybe when he married Holly, who had treated her husband's parents as an annoying obligation from the start. Holly was a beautiful, ambitious girl from a well-to-do family. She and David met at work, married a year later, and immediately began to build a lifestyle that fit their idea of success. There was no room in that image for family dinners with an elderly father-in-law or leisurely conversations about the past. I opened the photo album on my phone and flipped through pictures from the past few years. Here's the three of us at David's birthday party 3 years ago. Me smiling for the camera, my son and daughter-in-law looking strained. Here's a dinner together at a restaurant 2 years ago, the last time we all went out together. You can read the boredom and impatience on the young couple's faces, and here I am alone at my last birthday party, taking selfies with the cake I bought for myself. My phone vibrated. I looked at the screen hopefully, but it was just an advertisement from the cell phone carrier. I put the device down on the table and thought about what I was going to do next. Keep calling and sending gifts to nothing? Show up uninvited to Nashville and knock on their door? Or face the obvious? They didn't want me in their lives anymore. Outside the window, the rain intensified and I turned on the desk lamp. In the yellow light, the apartment seemed even more lonely. I took Mary's picture off the table, the only one I keep in plain sight. It showed her smiling, standing in the garden near the rose bushes she loved so much. If she were alive, she would never have allowed such alienation. Mary was able to speak David's language, to find compromises with Holly, to organize those family celebrations that brought us all together. What would you do in such a situation? I asked the picture, knowing there would be no answer. Mary always said that family is not only about blood ties, but also about constantly working on relationships. I've tried to work on them alone, but it takes at least two people. David and Holly stopped considering me a part of their lives a long time ago. To them, I had become a source of discomfort, someone who reminded them of some obligation they wanted to get rid of. I remembered calling David a month ago and hearing Holly's laughter in the background. They were clearly having fun, hanging out with friends or watching a comedy. But when his son picked up the phone, his voice became formal and dry. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" "What's up?" As if a father could only call in case of disaster. Not "how are you?" Not "good to hear from you," but just this formal inquiry as to the reason for the call. "Nothing happened? I just wanted to hear your voice," I answered then. "Oh, I see. Dad, I'm a little busy right now. Maybe we'll call tomorrow?" Tomorrow never came. Neither was the day after tomorrow, or the week after that. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. The automatic movements, water, stove, mug, helped me not to think about the fact that life had turned into waiting for calls that didn't come. The refrigerator held food for one person, a small piece of cheese, yogurt, apples. In the past, Mary had always bought a stockpile in case David and his family came over. No such need now. The phone came to life again. This time it was Mrs. Patricia's neighbor, an elderly woman who lived one floor above and sometimes dropped by for a chat. "Ronald, dear, could you help me with my computer? It's frozen again, and the grandchildren aren't coming until next week." "Sure, Patricia, I'll be right up. At least someone needs my help," I thought, as I headed for the elevator. Mrs. Patricia had her own problems with her family. Her grandchildren rarely visited. Her daughter lived in another state. But she didn't dwell on it. She took the situation for granted and found joy in the little things. TV shows, talking to neighbors, caring for her houseplants. Maybe I should learn to accept reality as it is, to realize that David is grown, has built his own life, and doesn't need his father anymore. That Holly will never be the kind of daughter-in-law who calls just for fun or invites me to family gatherings. That my attempts to restore intimacy seemed intrusive and would only push them away even more. As I walked up the elevator, I thought about picking up the phone again tomorrow, dialing my son's number again, and again hearing long beeps or a formal answer. Because as long as I keep trying, there remains some hope that I still have a family. It's been another 2 weeks since that rainy October day when I once again failed to reach David. In that time, I'd managed to send him 3 texts, 1 email, and even tried writing Holly directly. The result was predictably nil. The red check marks appeared correctly, but there were no replies. I sat in my living room with a cup of morning coffee and flipped through the calendar on my phone. David's wedding anniversary was in a week, 10 years together with Holly. I remembered their wedding, a small ceremony at a hotel in Nashville. Back then, I still hoped that Holly would be my daughter, that we would spend the holidays together, that I would have grandchildren, the naive dreams of a 70-year-old widower. I opened the online store where I had once bought gifts for Mary and began browsing the jewelry section. Maybe a beautiful pair of earrings for Holly and an expensive watch for David could melt the ice of their indifference. I chose an elegant white gold set with small diamonds for my daughter-in-law and a classic Swiss watch for my son. The total came to almost $3,000, a significant portion of my pension, but how can you save money for your family? While placing the order, I thought for a long time about the text of the greeting card. What to write to people who have been ignoring you for 6 months. Dear children, congratulations on your anniversary. I wish you happiness and prosperity. Hope to see you soon. Love, Daddy. Trite but sincere. I entered the delivery address and chose the option hand delivered. The next day, I decided to be more decisive. I dialed my son's number and, after hearing the usual beeps, waited for the answering machine. David, it's Dad. I know you're busy, but I really want to talk to you. Tomorrow's your wedding anniversary and I've sent gifts. Please call me when you have time. I'll be waiting. I spoke slowly and clearly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. At the end, I added, I miss you, son. The handset beeped, signaling the end of the recording. I put the phone on the table and waited. Half an hour, 2 hours. By evening, it was clear there would be no call. I tried again. Again the answering machine. This time I didn't leave a message. On the morning of their anniversary, I woke up with hope. Maybe when they received their gifts, they would remember me after all. I specifically ordered a 10 a.m. delivery so that the courier would catch them at home before work. I sat by my phone all day, checking the delivery status on the app every half hour. At 10:30, it said, Delivered, recipient Holly Clark. I imagined her opening the boxes, marveling at the beauty of the jewelry, showing the watch to David. Maybe they'll sit down to breakfast and discuss that Daddy remembers important dates after all, that he tries to be a part of their lives. Maybe David will pick up the phone and dial my number. No one called by lunchtime. By evening, neither did anyone. Before I went to bed, I wrote a quick message. Hope you enjoyed the gifts. Happy anniversary. I sent it and went to bed with a heavy heart. In the morning, the message was marked read. There was no reply. Another week passed. I tried a different tactic. I wrote a long email. I told them about my life, how I missed family meetings, that I wanted to know how they were doing at work, whether they had vacation plans, whether they were thinking about children. The letter turned out to be 2 pages long. I tried to write lightly and casually, not to press for pity, but just to share my thoughts. I sent it on Monday morning. On Wednesday, I checked. The letter had been read. By Friday, there was still no response. Maybe they really do have a lot of work to do, I said out loud, sitting in an empty apartment. But deep down, I knew the truth. David had been working as a computer programmer for 15 years, and never before had work interfered with his relationship with his family. When Mary was alive, he'd made time for calls and visits. The problem was not his busyness, but his unwillingness to communicate with me. I tried to analyze what went wrong. Maybe I was being too intrusive, calling and texting too often. But how else do you maintain relationships with people who live in another city? Maybe they don't like the fact that I live alone and might seem like a burden. But I didn't ask for help. On the contrary, I offered mine. Or was it because after Mary's death, I became a stranger to them? I mean, she was the one who ran all our family connections. She organized holidays, remembered birthdays, called David just to see how things were going. I had been more of a silent participant in this relationship, and now I was trying to take on a role I wasn't ready for. That evening of the same day, I took the desperate step of calling David's office. I had his work phone number, which I had never used, believing it unethical to distract my son while he was at work. But the usual methods of communication were clearly not working. A secretary answered the phone. Agra, Tech Solutions, Development Department. How can I help you? Good afternoon. May I speak to David Clark, please? Who's asking for him? His father, Ronald Clark. Pause, then, one moment, please. I heard her say something to someone, then she picked up the phone again. I'm sorry, but Mr. Clark is in an important meeting right now. Why don't you leave a message? Please tell him my father called. Tell him to call me back when he's free. I will. I knew the message would get through. I also knew there wouldn't be a call. And I was right. The next day, I went to the bank to wire money to David's account. Not a large sum, $1,000, just to show that I was thinking about him, that I wanted to help. In a comment on the transfer, I wrote, From Daddy with love, spend it on something nice for you and Holly. The money was withdrawn from the account the next day. No thanks, of course, followed. I began to feel like a clingy old man who didn't take the hint. But what were these hints? No one had told me directly, Dad, leave us alone. No one explained what the problem was. Just silence, endless, drawn-out silence. After another week, I tried texting Holly on social media. I sent her a private message. Holly, dear, I hope you and David are doing well. Haven't heard from you in a while. If I have offended you in any way, I apologize. I just want to be a part of your family. Regards, Ronald. The message was read a few hours later. There was no reply, but the next day I discovered that Holly had blocked me on social media. I could no longer see her photos, posts, stories. It was a clear and unmistakable message. I sat in front of my computer and stared at the blank page where my sister-in-law's profile used to be. User not found was the system's laconic message. It was as if Holly had simply disappeared from my life, and David disappeared with her, because I knew they had made this decision together. That night I cried for the first time in months. Not from self-pity, but from the realization that all my attempts had been in vain, that the family I had tried to keep together after Mary's death had actually died with her. David and Holly were just waiting for the right time to make it official. I pulled out a picture of our last meeting together, the one from 2 years ago. We were sitting in a restaurant. I was smiling at the camera, and I could see the impatience on their faces. How did I not notice it then? How did I not realize that for them, this dinner was an obligation, an unpleasant necessity? Mary always said, family is not only blood, but the desire to be together. I had the desire, but there clearly wasn't enough for everyone. David and Holly had built their family with no room for an elderly father, with his need for companionship and closeness. I realized it was time to take that as a given. It's time to stop writing messages that don't get read, to stop calling numbers that aren't answered. It's time to stop sending gifts that are received silently. It's time to admit that I've become redundant in their lives. But admitting and accepting are different things. Acceptance was something I couldn't do yet. November in Memphis was cold and gray. I woke up on another morning feeling like my life was frozen at one point, waiting for calls that didn't come and hopes that didn't come true. Outside my bedroom window, the bare branches of a maple tree swayed in the wind, reminding me of my own nakedness and defenselessness. A month had passed since Holly blocked me on social media, and I hadn't made any attempt to contact my family since. It was my personal experiment to see if they would call first if I stopped pestering them with my attention. The result of the experiment was predictable. Silence. Complete, utter silence. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and looked at the calendar. November 27th, 2 days from now, was Thanksgiving, a holiday we used to always spend together. Mary cooked the turkey. I was in charge of the side dishes and dessert. David brought the wine. After she died, my son and I tried to keep the tradition going for 2 more years, but it felt more like a fulfillment of duty than a family celebration. For the past 3 years, I've spent the holiday alone, each time hoping David would remember and invite me. This year, I didn't even harbor such illusions. I turned on my computer and went to the airline's website. I wanted to go somewhere for the holidays. Not to sit at home with the memories, but to be somewhere where no one would remind me that I once had a family. I've been looking at tour deals for solo travelers. Florida, Arizona, California. Warm places where you can forget about winter and yourself. I ended up choosing a week-long tour of Utah's national parks, red canyons, majestic cliffs, endless skies, a place where one feels part of something bigger than their own problems. I booked a tour that started on November 28th. Let other families gather around holiday tables. I'll be admiring the sunset over the desert. As I made the reservation, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I had made a decision that was all about me. Not David, not Holly, not our non-existent relationship, just me. The tour turned out to be exactly what I needed. The group consisted of 12 people, mostly retirees who, like me, had decided to spend the holidays traveling. We didn't ask each other about family circumstances, just enjoyed the beauty of nature and easy communication. The guide, an energetic woman in her 50s named Janet, talked about the history of these places with such enthusiasm that I temporarily forgot about my problems. On the 3rd day of the tour, standing on the edge of Bryce Canyon and looking at the fantastic red-orange sandstone towers, I suddenly realized that I hadn't thought about David and Holly for 2 days in a row. It was an amazing discovery. It turns out I can exist independent of thinking about them, of hoping for their call, of planning another attempt at a relationship. "This place is amazing, isn't it?" said an older woman standing next to me. Her name was Dorothy, she was from Oregon, and she had been traveling alone for several years. "Yes," I agreed. "Makes you see things from a different angle." "You mean perspective?" She smiled. "When you stand in front of such beauty, you realize that most of our problems aren't worth a dime." We got to talking. Dorothy told me that she had been widowed 8 years ago and had 2 grown children who lived their own lives. After her husband died, she stayed at home for a year, expecting her children to visit her more often, to invite her to holidays, to help her cope with her loneliness. But then she realized, they don't have to live her life. "You know what I did?" she said, looking out over the canyon. "I made a list of all the things I dreamed about but never decided to do. And I started realizing those dreams one by one. In 8 years, I traveled to 23 countries, learned to play the piano, volunteered at an animal shelter. And the kids? They call when they want to talk, come to visit at Christmas, send their grandchildren for summer vacation. But I no longer look forward to that as my only source of happiness." Her words stuck in my head. When we got back to the hotel, I sat on the balcony for a long time, thinking about what I had heard. I had spent 5 years after Mary's death trying to recreate a family relationship that may never have existed as I remembered it. Maybe the closeness I felt before only existed because of my wife's efforts. Maybe David had always treated me formally. It was just that Mary had skillfully disguised it. That night I had a strange dream. I was standing in a large house, the same house where Mary and I had lived and where David had grown up. The house was empty, but not abandoned. Just empty, as if waiting for new tenants. I walked around the rooms and realized that I could either stay here and wait for someone to come and fill that void, or I could get out and start building a new life elsewhere. In the dream, I chose the latter. When I woke up, I felt that the dream was not just a subconscious game, but a clue. I opened up my laptop and started researching information about changing locations, about how people start a new life in a new city, about leaving the past behind, not giving up on it completely, but not letting it determine the future either. When I returned from my trip to Memphis, the apartment felt even stranger. Same walls, same furniture, but I was looking at it all through the eyes of someone who had already mentally left here. The first thing I did was check my phone. No missed calls from David. No messages asking where I was, if I was okay. My week-long absence had gone unnoticed to them. It finally confirmed my decision. The next day, I went to the library and asked the librarian to help me find information about my name change in documents. The young girl looked at me with surprise. Apparently, it is not every day that 70-year-old men come to her with such questions, but she professionally helped me to find the necessary materials. I learned that the procedure for changing a name in Tennessee is quite simple for people without a criminal record. You have to file a petition with the court, pay a fee, publish a notice in the newspaper, and wait for the judge's decision. The entire process takes anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks. The reasons can range from wanting to get rid of unpleasant associations to simply wanting to change your life. I spent an entire afternoon in the library researching the legal aspects of changing my identity. It turned out that in addition to a new name, I would need a new social security number, a new driver's license, and a new passport. It's a lot of work, but doable. In the evening at home, I sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. On a blank sheet of paper, I wrote, "A new life, a plan of action." Then I added the first item, "Choose a new name." This turned out to be harder than I thought. What do you call yourself to a man who has lived 70 years with one name? I went through the options. William, Robert, James. They all seemed foreign to me. In the end, I settled on the name Walter. It sounded solid but not pretentious. I decided to change my surname to Green, a simple American, easy to remember. Walter Green. I said the name out loud several times, listening to the sound. Gradually, it began to feel natural to me. The next item on the plan was choose a new place to live. I didn't want to stay in Tennessee. Too many memories, too much chance of accidentally meeting someone I knew. After studying a map, I settled on North Carolina, a state with a mild climate, decent retiree health care, and affordable real estate. The city of Asheville attracted me with its reputation as a cultural center with many museums, theaters, and an active senior community. The third point, prepare finances. I had enough savings to start a new life, but needed to organize everything wisely. Sell my Memphis apartment, transfer my pension to a new address, open bank accounts in a new name. The fourth item proved the most difficult emotionally. What to do with the past? Photos with Mary, family heirlooms, things related to David. Which of these to take with me and which to keep? I decided I would take some of the most expensive things and sell or gift the rest. Last item, when to start. I looked at the calendar. It was the end of November. If I file for a name change in early December, I'd have all the new documents by the end of January. By March, I could sell the apartment and move. That gave me 4 months to prepare. Enough time to do everything thoroughly. That night, I slept better than I had in the last 6 months. For the first time, I had a plan, a purpose, a raison d'etre that didn't involve waiting for attention from an indifferent family. In the morning, I woke up with a firm decision to act immediately. I had breakfast, showered, put on my best suit, and went to the courthouse. In the waiting room of the attorney who was handling the name change, I felt strange, like a man on the cusp of a new life. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, turned out to be a pleasant middle-aged man. He listened carefully to my explanation. Mr. Clark, may I ask what your decision is? Of course, you don't have to answer, but it's better for the court to have a clear rationale. I thought for a few seconds and then I said, I want to start a new chapter in my life. After my wife died, I feel like my old life is over. I want to become a different person. I see, he nodded. That's a legitimate reason. Let's do the paperwork. We spent 2 hours filling out the petition. Mr. Harrison explained the whole process: filing, publication in the newspaper, court hearing. He also gave me a list of other documents that would need to be changed after receiving the court order. Walking out of the attorney's office, I felt light and anxious at the same time. I had taken the first real step toward becoming Walter Green. Ronald Clark had begun to disappear. That same day, I went to the real estate agency and met with the real estate agent. A 45-year-old woman, businesslike and energetic, looked at my apartment and said that with the current state of the market, I could sell it for a good price within 2 or 3 months. Are you moving in with the kids? She asked, making an appraisal. No, I replied. I just want a change of scenery. She nodded without asking too many questions. In the real estate business, apparently, they are used to different reasons for moving. That evening, I sat in my living room and looked at the picture with Mary. Would she have liked my idea? Or would she consider it an escape from reality? It seemed to me that Mary would have understood. She always said life was too short to waste it on misery. I picked up my phone and dialed David's number one last time. Not to try to repair the relationship, but to tell myself that I had tried everything possible. As usual, no one answered. David, it's Dad, I said to the answering machine. I wanted to let you know that I may be moving to another city soon. If you ever want to talk to me, give me a call. I'll always be glad to hear from you. He didn't add anything else. He hung up and turned off the phone. Ronald Clark was taking the last steps in his old life. February was surprisingly warm in Memphis. Sunlight streamed through the windows of my apartment, illuminating the boxes and suitcases that stood everywhere. For 3 months, my life had become an organized chaos of moving preparations. On the kitchen table was a stack of new documents: a driver's license in Walter Green's name, a new passport, bank statements, transferring accounts. A judge had approved my name change petition in late January, and I was now officially a different person. It was strange to see my picture next to someone else's name. Walter Green was looking at me from a plastic driver's license card, and I was trying to get used to the idea that it was me. 70 years of living under the name Ronald Clark was over. A new story had begun. The realtor called early in the morning. Mr. Green, she said, and I still flinched when someone called me that. We have buyers for your apartment. A young couple is offering full price, cash. The deal could be closed as early as next week. I agreed without hesitation. The money from the sale would allow me to settle comfortably in Asheville and not worry about finances for the first few years of my new life. I had already rented a small house in a quiet neighborhood in North Carolina. I looked it up online and contacted the owner. A 2-bedroom, 1-story house with a porch and a small garden, half an hour from the city center. Just what a person looking for a fresh start needed. That afternoon, I was in the process of sorting out my personal belongings. This proved to be the most difficult part of the whole process. Every item in the apartment was connected to some memory. Books that Mary and I had read together. The dishes we went shopping for on our honeymoon. Pictures of David as a child, a smiling boy building sand castles and chasing a ball in the yard. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by boxes, and sorted through old albums. Here's David at 6, losing his first tooth. Here he is at 12, proudly holding his diploma for winning his high school math contest. Here's his university graduation, Mary hugging him, me standing next to him with a proud smile. And here is his wedding, the last time we were truly a happy family. Some of the photos I decided to take with me. Not all of them. Too many memories can get in the way of starting a new life. But a few of the most treasured shots of Mary and David's baby pictures deserved a place in Walter Green's home. The rest I decided to donate or sell. I called a company that dealt in furniture and appliances. 2 middle-aged men arrived with a truck and in 2 hours had removed almost everything that made up my apartment. The couch where Mary and I watched movies in the evenings. The dining room table where we'd eaten breakfast for 20 years. The bookshelves filled with volumes I'd collected all my life. "Nice stuff," one of the movers said as he looked over the furniture. "Are you sorry to part with it?" "No," I answered honestly. "They need new owners." I had taken Mary's clothes to a charity back in December. It seemed unbearably difficult at the time, but it turned out to be the right thing to do. Her dresses, shoes, jewelry would find new life with other women. I didn't need these reminders of the past. The memories of her I carried in my heart. In the evening, in an almost empty apartment, I sat on the only remaining chair and drank coffee from a cardboard cup. Tomorrow the buyers were due to arrive for the final inspection and signing of the papers. The day after tomorrow, I would be leaving for Asheville. Ronald Clark would be gone from Memphis forever. I pulled out my phone and looked at it. In 3 months of preparing for the move, David hadn't called once. My message about a possible move he had apparently ignored, just like everyone else. Part of me hoped that at least the news of his departure would make him contact me. But no, I dialed his number one last time. Not to explain anything or apologize, just to hear his voice before Ronald Clark disappeared from this world. Long beeps, answering machine. "Hi, this is David Clark. Leave a message and I'll call you back." I listened to the familiar voice and realized it was the last time I'd hear it. When the tape ended, I didn't say anything. I just hung up. Then I took a notebook and wrote a letter. Not a long one. No recriminations or accusations. Just the facts. "David, this is the last letter from your father. By the time you read it, I will no longer be in Memphis. I've made the decision to make a drastic change in my life and move somewhere else. I won't tell you where, not to punish you, but because I believe people should be free to choose. You chose to live without a father, and I respect that choice. Now I choose a life without a son who doesn't want to be one. Don't come looking for me. Live happily ever after with Holly. Your mother loved you unconditionally, and that love was the best thing I could give you. That's all I have. Goodbye. Ronald." I reread the letter a few times, made minor edits, and rewrote it. I sealed it in an envelope and wrote David's address in Nashville. "I'll mail it tomorrow. The letter will arrive a few days after I leave." I didn't sleep much during the night. I lay on an air mattress in an empty bedroom and listened to the sounds of the city outside the window. Memphis was living its life, unaware that one of its residents was preparing to disappear. Ronald Clark would wake up here in the morning, and in the evening he would be gone. At 8 in the morning, the buyers arrived, a young couple with a 2-year-old child. They were excitedly looking around the empty rooms, discussing where they would put the crib, where there would be a play area. Their joy was genuine and a little painful for me. I too had once been a young father who had made plans for a happy family life in a new home. "It's a great apartment," my husband said. "It feels like happy people have lived here." "Yes," I replied. "We've lived here for many good years." We signed the papers at the realtor's office. The money was deposited into my new account in Walter Green's name. I handed the keys to the new owners personally. The young woman took them gratefully, as if I'd given them the most valuable thing in the world. Maybe I had. After the transaction was completed, I went to the post office to send a letter to David. The clerk behind the counter accepted the envelope without much interest. To him, it was ordinary correspondence. He didn't know that this letter ended a story of 38 years. Then I stopped by the bank to close the last accounts in Ronald Clark's name. The manager, a young fellow who had served me for the last 2 years, asked, "Mr. Clark, are you moving?" "In a way, yes," I replied. "It's a shame to lose a good customer. Good luck with the new place." I thanked him and walked out of the bank. I stopped in the parking lot and looked around. Here was the building where I had worked for the last 10 years before I retired. There's the cafe where I sometimes ate breakfast on weekends. Here's the store where he bought his groceries. The ordinary life of an ordinary man in an ordinary city. All this will remain, but without me. I got into the car in an old but reliable Honda Accord, which I decided to take with me into my new life. In the trunk were 3 suitcases of clothes, a box of photos and documents, a few books, and a picture of Mary in a wooden frame. It was all that remained of Ronald Clark's 70 years of life. Before I left, I stopped by the cemetery to visit Mary's grave. It was a clear February day and the sun lit up the gray headstones, making them look almost solemn. I bought a bunch of white roses, her favorite flowers, and went to the familiar grave. "Hello, darling," I said, setting the flowers in a vase. "I came to say goodbye." I told her about my decision, about my new name, about the house in Asheville. I spoke quietly, as if she could hear me. Maybe she could. Who knows how the world works? "David made his choice," I said to the tombstone. "Now I'm making mine. Don't be angry with him. He's just a different man, not the man we imagined him to be. And I'm going to try to be something I never was. Free." I stood in silence for a few minutes, saying goodbye not only to my wife, but to the part of me that was Mary's husband and David's father. That part would remain here in Memphis, along with the memories and hopes that never came true. "Goodbye, my love," I finally said. As I left the cemetery, I didn't turn around. The drive to Asheville took 6 hours. I drove slowly, stopping at roadside cafes and admiring the scenery of Tennessee and North Carolina. I had the feeling that every mile separated me not only from my old place of residence, but from my old life. Somewhere between Nashville and Asheville, Ronald Clark had finally disappeared and Walter Green had begun. I arrived in Asheville in the evening. The city greeted me with warm lights and a peaceful atmosphere. The rented house was even better than it looked in the photos, cozy with modern appliances and a view of the mountains. The owner, Mrs. Collins, a woman in her 60s, showed me around and left a basket of groceries in the kitchen. "Welcome to Asheville, Mr. Green," she said. "I hope you like it here." "Thank you," I replied. "I'm sure I will." When she left, I was alone in the new house. I took out Mary's picture and put it on the mantelpiece. She smiled at me from the wooden frame as if she approved of my decision. In the evening, I sat on the veranda and watched the lights of the city below. Somewhere out there in Nashville, 200 miles away, lived my ex-son and his wife. Tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, he would get a letter and find out that his father had disappeared. Will he try to find me? Or would he just shrug his shoulders and go on with his life? I didn't care. I did everything I could to be a good father. David did everything he could to show me he didn't need a father like that. Now we're even. I pulled out the new cell phone I'd bought in Asheville and dialed the cab service. Tomorrow I'd have to go into town, check in at the local health clinic, find the nearest supermarket, familiarize myself with the neighborhood. Walter Green had a new life to build from scratch, and Ronald Clark was in the past, along with his hopes for a happy family and the pain of their collapse. Late that night, I lay in my new bed in my new home and thought about the strangeness of what was happening. For 70 years, I had been one person, and now I was different. Not outwardly, inwardly. Walter Green was free from the obligations to an indifferent son, from waiting for calls that don't come, from trying to patch up a broken relationship. Walter Green could live for himself. It was scary and exciting at the same time. As I fell asleep, I thought about starting a new chapter tomorrow. No past, no family, no pain of rejection. Just me, a new home, and the endless possibilities of what one could become at 70. Outside the window, the wind rustled in the North Carolina mountains, and the sound seemed like a lullaby for a new life. March in Asheville turned out to be surprisingly mild and sunny. I woke up every morning at 7 o'clock, not because of an alarm clock, but because my body had adjusted itself to a new rhythm. Outside my bedroom window, the leaves of the big oak tree rustled and the birds began their morning concert. It was so different from the sounds of Memphis, the freeway noise, the honking of cars, the hustle and bustle of the city. Here in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Asheville, time flowed differently, measured and peaceful. I spent the first few weeks exploring the new city. Every day I got in my car and drove to explore another neighborhood. Asheville turned out to be a surprisingly diverse place. The old downtown with Victorian architecture was next to modern neighborhoods. Art galleries were next to cozy cafes that served the best coffee of my life. The mountains surrounding the city made it feel protected and secluded, as if the outside world was somewhere far away. I rented a house in a neighborhood called Montford. Quiet, green, populated mostly by middle-aged and elderly people. The neighbors here stayed out of the way, but were friendly. Mrs. Collins, the landlady, came in a week after I moved in to see how I was settling in. "Mr. Green, do you like our town?" she asked, sitting down in the kitchen with a cup of tea. "Very much," I replied sincerely. "Shri, it has such a peaceful atmosphere. I've been looking for a place to relax for a long time." "And the family? Will the children visit?" I had anticipated this question and prepared an answer in advance. "I have no close relatives. My wife died a few years ago. I had no children." I decided to spend my remaining years in a beautiful place. It was a lie, but a necessary lie. Walter Green really had no family. Ronald Clark had family, which was a thing of the past. Mrs. Collins nodded sympathetically. "I understand, but it's a very friendly community here. The senior center has a lot of interesting activities. Maybe you should get to know people." I thanked her for her advice, but at that time I was not ready for active communication. I needed time to get used to the role of Walter Green, to learn to be him naturally. I spent the first month organizing the house. I bought new furniture. Simple, functional, no frills, a white sofa, a wooden table, a comfortable reading chair. No family photos on view, just a few landscapes by local artists that I bought at a downtown gallery. I put Mary's picture on the bedside table in the bedroom. She was a part of my past that I wasn't ready to let go of completely. I made new habits. I started each morning with a walk around the neighborhood, 40 minutes among houses with neat front gardens and old trees, breakfast in the kitchen, reading the local newspaper. After lunch, I would drive to the city center, walk around the historic district, visit museums and galleries. Evenings were spent at home reading or watching movies. It was a measured, quiet life of a man who owed nothing to anyone and expected nothing from anyone. At the end of March, I decided to take my first serious step in socialization. I signed up for a photography course at the local art center. I had never been seriously involved in photography, but in my new life, I wanted to try something completely new. The course was taught by a man in his 50s named Tom Anderson, a professional photographer who had moved to Asheville from New York City a few years ago. "Welcome to the course," he said on the first day, addressing the group of 8. "Photography isn't just a technique, it's a way of seeing the world anew." I love that phrase. Seeing the world anew was exactly what I wanted. There were people of different ages in the group, but most were retirees who, like me, had decided to learn a new hobby. There was an elderly lady named Rose who used to be a school teacher. There was a retired Colonel Jack, a serious man with a military bearing. There was a young mom named Sarah who wanted to learn how to take beautiful pictures of children. We introduced ourselves cautiously, telling only basic facts about ourselves. I introduced myself as Walter Green, recently moved from Tennessee, said I was retired, lived alone, and wanted to try something new. No one asked for details. Privacy was respected here. The course was held twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The first class was about the basics: composition, light, camera settings. Tom gave us homework assignments: photographing the sunrise, finding interesting shadows, catching movement. I was passionate about these assignments, walking around the city with my new digital camera. Photography turned out to be exactly what I needed. When you look at the world through the viewfinder, focusing on composition and light, there is no room for sad thoughts. There is only the moment, the frame, the beauty to be caught. In April, I felt confident enough to expand my social circle. I signed up at the city library and began attending a literary club that met once every 2 weeks. Participants discussed classic and modern literature, shared their impressions of what they had read. It was intellectual communication without personal details, just what suited me. The club was led by Margaret Stone, a woman in her 60s, a former professor of English literature at the local university. She was intelligent, well-read, and sensitive, never asking personal questions, but creating an atmosphere in which people felt comfortable. "Mr. Green," she said after one meeting where we were discussing Chekhov's stories, "you have an interesting perspective on literature. You have a lot of life experience." "Thank you," I replied. "Literature helps you understand life, sometimes even your own." She smiled understandingly. "Books are the best teachers and comforters." At the literary club, I met Henry Williams, a man my age, a retired doctor. He had moved to Asheville after his wife died, looking for a new use for his knowledge and energy. Henry was doing volunteer work at the local hospital, counseling patients for free. "You know, Walter," he said one day after a club meeting, "retirement is not the end of life. It's an opportunity to do things you didn't have time for before." "I agree," I replied. "The main thing is to find something that brings satisfaction." "What do you like to do besides literature?" "I have recently become interested in photography. I'm learning to see beauty in ordinary things." "That's great. And I'm thinking about gardening. I've always dreamed of growing perfect roses." We began to meet occasionally for coffee, discussing books, sharing impressions of the city. Henry was a good conversationalist, intelligent, tactful, not intrusive. Gradually, I developed a sense of friendship, the first in many months. By May, I was fully settled into my new role. Morning walks, photography courses, a literary club, meetings with Henry. I had a steady rhythm of life. I hardly thought about the past, focusing on the present. One morning, walking in the park, I met a woman about my age who was feeding the ducks on the pond. She was elegant, with silver hair and kind eyes. She had a cane lying next to her. Apparently, she was having trouble with her leg. "It's a beautiful morning," I said, stopping beside her. "Yes," she said. "I come here every day. The ducks already know me." Indeed, the birds approached her without fear, clearly accustomed to regular feeding. "I'm Walter Green," I introduced myself. "I've recently moved to Asheville." "Eleanor Hayes," she said. "I've lived here for 12 years. Do you like our city?" "I love it. It's so peaceful." We got to talking. Eleanor was a former school principal, a widow who had moved to Asheville from Florida. She had 2 grown children who lived in other states and visited rarely. "After my husband died, I realized I didn't want to sit at home and wait for the kids to call," she said with a slight smile. "I decided to live life to the fullest." Her words resonated with me. She had traveled the same path as I had, only she had chosen a gentler way of adapting. "Was it hard to start over?" I asked. "At first, yes, but gradually you realize that you have a choice, to feel sorry for yourself or to look for new opportunities." From then on, we began to meet in the park almost every morning. Eleanor told me about the local sites. I shared my impressions from my photography courses. Communication with her was easy and natural. No attempts to find out details of the past, no pressure for intimacy. In June, Tom announced that our group was ready for its first exhibition of work. Each of us was to choose the 5 best photographs to exhibit at a local gallery. I spent a long time going through the pictures taken during my 3 months of study. There were landscapes of the mountains surrounding Asheville, portraits of elderly people I shot with permission in the park, still lifes with the play of light and shadow. I eventually chose a series called New Beginnings, photographs of spring sprouts breaking through the asphalt, young leaves on old trees, dawn over the mountains. All the photos were united by the theme of rebirth, the beginning of a new life. A lot of people came on the opening day of the exhibition. My works were hanging next to the photos of other participants of the course. People stopped, looked at them, made comments. Henry came to support me, and Eleanor was among the guests. "Very symbolic," Margaret from the literary club said as she studied my photographs. "There's a philosophical approach to the subject." "Thank you," I replied. "Photography helps me to understand my own changes." Tom came up at the end of the evening. "Walter, you have a real talent. Have you thought about continuing your studies? I have an advanced course for those who want to take photography seriously." I said yes, without hesitation. Photography has become not just a hobby for me, but a way of expressing myself and learning about the world. By the end of the summer, I had fully adapted to life at Walter Green. I had a circle of acquaintances, interesting activities, a measured existence. I learned to cook new dishes, learned the basics of gardening, read dozens of books. The house in Montfort became truly my home. Sometimes in the evenings, I would sit on the veranda and reflect on the past months. Ronald Clark seemed a different man to me now, unhappy, dependent on other people's attention, unable to find joy in his own life. Walter Green was free of these problems. He built a life of his own choosing, not expecting approval or participation from people who didn't appreciate him. Of course, sometimes sadness crept in, especially when he saw grandfathers with grandchildren or families picnicking in the park. But this sadness was light, without bitterness. I grieved not for the lost family, but for that ideal of family that never existed in reality. In August, an event occurred that finally confirmed to me the correctness of my decision. Henry introduced me to a friend of his, a local doctor who was looking for a volunteer to help with a program to rehabilitate elderly stroke patients. He needed someone who could do simple exercises with the patients, read to them, and just socialize. "You have a gift for connecting with people," Henry said, "and free time. It could be good for you and the patients." I agreed to give it a try. I started going to the hospital twice a week, working with elderly people who were relearning to speak and move after their illness. It was difficult but rewarding work. I saw how people fight for every word, for every movement, how much they appreciate simple human participation. One of my mentees was a woman named Betty, a 75-year-old former teacher who had suffered a severe stroke. Her children lived far away and rarely visited. We spent time reading. First I read aloud to her, then she gradually began to read by herself, syllabically, slowly regaining her speech. "Walter," she said one day when we were reading Frost's poems, "you are such a kind man. Do you have a family?" "No," I answered honestly, "but I have friends, and I have the opportunity to help wonderful people like you." She smiled, the first full smile I'd seen in the months I'd known her. "Family isn't just blood," she said with difficulty. "Family is those who are there for you when you need them." Those words were a revelation to me. I had found my new family: Henry, Eleanor, the literary club members, the hospital patients, people who valued my presence and who valued me, not because of blood ties, but because we chose to be important to each other. By the end of the summer, I realized the experiment with a new life had succeeded. Walter Green not only existed, it thrived. He had a rich, meaningful life full of interesting people and activities. He didn't wait for calls that didn't come, and he didn't waste energy on relationships that only brought pain. September evenings in Asheville were especially beautiful. I sat on the veranda drinking tea and looking out at the mountains colored by the setting sun. I held my camera in my hands, preparing to catch the moment when the light would be perfect for a shot. Nearby on the table was a book of poems that we would discuss at the next meeting of the literary club. Life was good, not perfect. There is no such thing as perfect. But good, filled with meaning and joy. And most importantly, it was mine, built by my choice and for my happiness. Ronald Clark no longer existed. All that remained was Walter Green, a free man who had learned to live for himself. September in Asheville was drawing to a close when I received a call from Mrs. Patricia. I was sitting in the kitchen eating breakfast, looking through the pictures I had taken the day before in the mountains, and I didn't immediately recognize the number on the phone screen, an old number from Memphis that I'd left on, but had almost forgotten it existed. It hadn't gotten a single call in 6 months. "Hello," I answered, surprised. "Ronald? Oh my God, finally, I thought something had happened to you." Mrs. Patricia's voice sounded like an echo from a past life. The neighbor from the apartment upstairs who sometimes asked for help with the computer. A kind older woman who was one of the few people who had taken a genuine interest in my affairs during the last months of living in Memphis. "Patricia," I said, thinking quickly about what to answer. "How are you doing? What's wrong?" "Ronald, honey, where are you? Some people came to see you, asking about you. I told them you'd gone away, but they were very insistent. And then your son came." My heart skipped a beat. David came to Memphis, so he got my farewell letter and started looking for me. "When was that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. "About a month ago. First, some men in suits came by, showed me their IDs. They said they were looking for you at the request of your family. I told them you'd moved, but I didn't know where. A week later, David and his wife arrived. He looked very worried. I imagined this scene. David and Holly walking up the familiar stairs, ringing the doorbell of an apartment where no one else lives. I wonder what they felt at that moment. Anxiety? Guilt? Or just annoyance at having to deal with the search for their disappeared father? What did he say? I asked him. He asked when you'd left, if you'd told me where you were going, showed me some letter, said you'd written to him, that you were making a radical change in your life. He was very worried, Ronald. He said he'd been trying to call you, but your cell phone wasn't answering. Of course, there's no answer. I disconnected Ronald Clark's number back in March when I finally moved to Asheville. That phone belonged to someone else who no longer existed. Hamasunher, what did you tell them? That all I knew was that you were going to move. David asked for my number, said he'd call if there was any news. Ronald, what's going on? Why did you disappear without telling anyone? I closed my eyes and tried to formulate an answer. How do I explain to a kind woman who genuinely cares about me that I intentionally disappeared from the life of a son who had ignored me for years? Patricia, David, and I had a complicated relationship. After my wife died, things changed. I decided to start a new life in a new place. But your son is worried. He said he went to the police, but they said an adult has the right to disappear as long as he hasn't committed a crime. Ronald, maybe we should call him. No, I answered firmly. Patricia, I'm asking you, if David contacts you again, tell him I'm alive and well, but I don't want to be found. This is my conscious decision. Pause, then. Ronald, I don't understand. What could have happened to make you decide to break away from your family? Nothing in particular, I said tiredly. I just realized that we had become strangers. It's better to admit it honestly than to continue to suffer. We talked for a few more minutes. Patricia told me the news from home, who had moved into my former apartment, what was going on in the neighborhood. The ordinary lives of ordinary people that go on regardless of anyone's personal dramas. Before she hung up, she said, Ronald, I'm not going to judge you. You're a grown man and you know what you're doing. But if you ever want to talk to someone who understands you, call me. I'll always be glad to hear from you. After the conversation, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, thinking about what I'd learned. So David had started looking for her after all. He'd contacted the police, hired private investigators, traveled to Memphis. That told me that my disappearance had made an impression on him. But was it genuine concern for my father's fate, or just guilt that drove him to take formal action? Did he realize when he read my farewell letter that he himself had brought the situation to such an end? Or did he simply decide that my father had fallen into senile depression and needed to be found? I tried to imagine how events unfolded after receiving my letter. David reads it, shows it to Holly. They discuss the situation. Perhaps Holly says something like, "We need to find him, or people will think we've abandoned an elderly relative." Or David suddenly realizes he's lost his father and panic sets in. Either way, their search was doomed to failure. Ronald Clark had disappeared not only physically, but legally. Walter Green had no ties to a past life. I didn't use old credit cards. I didn't contact doctors I knew in Memphis. I didn't contact former coworkers. Even if they hired the best detectives, the trail would break on my leaving town. Patricia's call, however, shattered my calm. For 6 months, I'd lived in the belief that the past was behind me. Now it appeared that it was actively seeking me out. It made me feel strange, as if I were a fugitive, even though I had committed no crime. That evening, I met Henry at our favorite downtown cafe. We often spent evenings talking about literature, politics, and the philosophy of life. Henry was a perceptive man, and I could see that he noticed my thoughtfulness. "Walter, you seem preoccupied," he said when we ordered coffee. "Is something wrong?" I hesitated to tell him the truth. In the 6 months we'd been friends, we'd never discussed our past in detail. We each understood the other's reasons for moving to Asheville, and we respected that silence. "Henry," I said at last, "have you ever regretted decisions that seemed right?" "Of course," he answered, "but more often I regretted decisions I didn't make." "What do you regret?" "Sometimes I wonder if I've changed my life too radically, whether I'd hurt people who might have deserved an explanation." Henry looked at me carefully. "Walter, I don't know what happened in your past life, but a man of our age rarely makes drastic decisions without good reasons. If you ran away from something, It must have been worth it. What if I was wrong? If the people I walked away from actually loved me, they just didn't know how to show it. Then they'll find a way to fix it, Henry said simply. Love isn't just a feeling, it's also an action. If people love you, they will act accordingly. His words made me think. David was acting, looking for me, worrying, asking for help. But what was behind those actions? Love or a sense of duty, concern for my well-being, or fear of social judgment? The next day, I decided to do a little experiment. I went to an internet cafe downtown and created a fake social media account. Found David and Holly's pages, which had previously been blocked to me. What I saw surprised me. David's page had posts popping up that had never been there before. In June, he wrote, "If anyone knows anything about the whereabouts of Ronald Clark of Memphis, Tennessee, please contact me." Attached to the post was a picture of me, old but recognizable. In July, continuing the search for my father. Any information would be helpful. In August, please repost. We are very worried. Holly was also involved in the search. Her page had the same announcements, plus an emotional post. We realized we weren't the best kids. If Papa Ronald is reading this, please let us know you're okay. We're ready to turn things around. I read these posts with mixed feelings. On the one hand, it was nice to see that my disappearance had made an impression on them, made them rethink the relationship. On the other hand, these public appeals seem more like a demonstration for friends and acquaintances. Look, we're looking for a missing father. We're not heartless. The comments under the posts included condolences from friends, advice to contact the police and private investigators, and offers of help in the search. Some wrote, "I can't imagine how worried you are. I hope he's okay. Hang in there, you'll find him." Reading these comments, I realized something important. David and Holly were indeed worried, but their worry was colored by guilt and social pressure. They sought me out not because they missed being with me, but because my disappearance embarrassed them in front of others. If they truly wanted a relationship with me, they had 5 years after Mary's death to build one. Instead, they consistently pulled away, ignored my attempts to get closer, treated me like an obligation. Now that I was gone, they suddenly realized that losing their father was serious, but realized not because they understood my value, but because they understood what their behavior looked like from the outside. Nevertheless, their search created a certain risk for me. Although Ronald Clark's trail was carefully observed, there was always the possibility of a chance encounter. Asheville is not that far from Nashville. If they decided to expand the geography of their search, they could get here as well. I decided to take extra precautions. I went to the barber and changed my hairstyle. I wore my hair shorter and combed it differently. I bought new glasses. They changed my facial expression dramatically. He changed the way he dressed, wearing more athletic shoes and shirts instead of his usual suits. Henry noticed the change. "Walter, you look younger. The new look suits you." "Just freshening up," I replied. "A new life can be a new look. But more importantly, I've become more careful in my communications. I stopped mentioning Tennessee in conversations, avoided stories about the past that might give away my real background. Walter Green became even more private about his personal history. Eleanor once asked, "Walter, where did you work before you retired?" "In a small company," I answered evasively. "Nothing much. I prefer not to talk about work. It never fascinated me." She didn't insist. It was customary in our social circle to respect people's reluctance to talk about the past. A month after Patricia's call, I decided to contact her again. I wanted to know if the search was still going on, if there were any new details. "Ronald!" She was so happy. "How good of you to call. Your son came again." "When?" "Last week." He looked tired, upset, said the detectives couldn't find any trace of him. Bank accounts closed, phone disconnected, car sold. It's like you vanished into thin air. "And what did you tell him?" "Same thing I told him last time, that you're alive and well, but you don't want to be disturbed. He said to tell you, if you called, that they'd do anything to repair the relationship. Any terms. I wonder what that means. Ready to apologize for years of indifference? Ready to communicate regularly? Or are they just willing to get confirmation that the father's alive to ease their conscience?" "Patricia, did you tell him you talked to me?" "No." she answered after a pause. Somehow I got the feeling you didn't want me to. I only said that if I heard anything about you, I would be sure to pass it on. I was grateful for her delicacy. Patricia intuitively knew that there was more to this situation than a simple misunderstanding between relatives. Ronald, she said before we ended the conversation, I don't know what happened between you two, but he does seem like a man who has realized that he has lost something important. Maybe he did, but realizing what you've lost doesn't mean understanding why you've lost it. And it certainly doesn't guarantee that what is found will be valued more than what is lost. That evening, I sat on the veranda and pondered the strangeness of the situation. 6 months ago, I had dreamed of David calling, writing, coming. Now he was really looking for me, worried, ready for any conditions. But these searches only strengthened my confidence in the correctness of my decision, because they began only after my disappearance. 5 years of indifference were not erased by one farewell letter. Their anxiety was a reaction to shock, not the result of a rethinking of their relationship. If I showed up tomorrow and said, "Here I am, everything is fine," what would happen next? They will be happy, assure me that everything will be different, maybe even call more often for a few months. And then they'll gradually revert to their old pattern of behavior because I'll once again become a familiar part of their lives that can be ignored. Walter Green was free of these hopes and disappointments. He had his own life, his own relationships, his own plans. He didn't wait for calls or agonize over their absence. He just lived, fully, interestingly, meaningfully. And it was a life worth protecting. October brought the amazing beauty of fall colors to Asheville. The maple trees around my house turned golden and red colors, creating the kind of landscape that tourists come to photograph from all over the country. I was spending my mornings on the veranda with a cup of coffee, enjoying the cool air and the mountain view, when Patricia called again. This time I could hear a special concern in her voice. "Ronald, darling, there's something I need to tell you. Your son came again, but this time not alone." I set the cup aside and concentrated on the conversation. "What do you mean?" "He brought an old woman with him, introduced her as Mom's sister, your sister-in-law, Dorothy. She was crying, saying she was worried sick about you. David said she'd traveled all the way from California to join the search." Dorothy, Mary's sister, with whom we kept in touch for the first few years after my wife died. But then communication fell off. She was an emotional woman, prone to drama, but generally kind. I didn't expect David to turn to her for help. "What did she say?" "She told me what a good husband you were to Mary, how you took care of the family. She cried that she couldn't believe you just disappeared. Said Mary wouldn't have wanted that." Ronald, that was very touching. I pictured the scene. Dorothy with her eyes red with tears, David beside her, both of them appealing to Mary's memory, trying to achieve through emotion what they couldn't achieve through rational search. It was a smart move to use a relative of my wife's who could appeal to our shared past. "Anything else?" David showed me some photographs. Said he was putting together a scrapbook of family memories he wanted to give you when he found them. There were pictures of you and Mary's wedding, his childhood photos, family holidays. He's changed a lot, Ronald. He looks older, more tired. It's obvious the search has worn him out. A scrapbook of memories, another emotional technique. David was trying to recreate the image of a happy family that supposedly existed before and could be rebuilt. But these pictures didn't tell the whole truth. They didn't show the years of estrangement after Mary's death, the ignoring of my attempts at rapprochement, the cold indifference to my feelings. "Patricia, did you tell them anything about me?" "No, but it was very difficult, especially when Aunt Dorothy was crying. She said if anything happened to you, she'd never forgive herself, that she had to keep in touch after her sister died." Guilt. David mobilized every possible source of guilt. His own, Aunt Dorothy's, even my potential guilt over Mary's memory. He realized that rational pursuit was failing and turned to emotional influence. After talking to Patricia, I felt the need for more information. In the evening, I went to the internet cafe again and checked social media. What I saw amazed me with the scale of the campaign that had been launched. David had created a separate page called The Search for Ronald Clark. On it were dozens of photos from our family life. Many I was seeing for the first time. Apparently, David had carefully gone through all the old albums. Here I am, rocking him on a swing in the front yard when he was about 5 years old. Here's the three of us on a picnic, a happy family in nature. Here I am teaching him how to ride a bicycle. Each photo was captioned, "My dad was always there for me when I needed support. He taught me how to be a man, the best dad imaginable." As I read these words, I felt a strange mixture of bitterness and wonder. Where did these warm memories suddenly come from? Why hadn't they manifested themselves all these years? But the most striking thing was in the Our Mistakes section. David published a long post in which he openly admitted his shortcomings as a son. "After my mom died, I failed to be the son my dad deserved. Immersed myself in work, in my own problems, didn't see how hard it was for him to be alone. I ignored his calls, refused to see him, acted like a selfish child. Now that he's gone, I realize I've lost the most important person in my life. Dad, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I'm ready to change everything just to have you back." There were hundreds of reactions to the post in the comments. Friends supported David, shared their own stories about their relationships with their parents, and advised him not to despair. Many wrote that his honesty in admitting mistakes is worthy of respect. Holly also published an emotional post. "I was a terrible daughter-in-law. Treated Papa Ronald as an obligation, not a family member. He gave gifts, called, tried to be a part of our lives, and I built walls. I realize now that I lost the opportunity to know a wonderful man. Papa Ronald, please give us a chance to make things right." As I read these confessions, I felt conflicting emotions. On the one hand, it was good to see that they had finally realized their mistakes. Years of my attempts to mend the relationship had not been in vain. They remembered my calls, gifts, and invitations, which they had ignored at the time. On the other hand, these public penances seemed theatrical. Why did it take disappearing for them to realize my value? Why did the realization come only after the shock, rather than through the natural progression of the relationship? What struck me most was the reaction of their friends. There were many messages of support in the comments, but many wrote something like the following: "Don't blame yourself too much. All adult children neglect their parents sometimes. The important thing is that you realize the mistakes. When you find him, things will get better." These comments showed that for others, the situation looked like a typical family conflict that could be solved by mutual apologies and promises to be better. People did not realize the depth of the estrangement that had been building up for years. A What We Learned section also appeared on the search page. David detailed the investigation. Private investigators traced Dad's bank transactions through February. After that, total silence. Cars sold, accounts closed, phone disconnected. The last people to see him were neighbors in Memphis. He disappeared professionally like he'd been planning it for months. It was true, I had indeed planned the disappearance meticulously, envisioned every detail. But what surprised me was that David understood it, and even appreciated it to some extent. In his words, I could hear not only despair, but also a strange admiration for the thoroughness of my plan. In another post he wrote, "We realized that Dad wasn't the victim of an accident or crime. He consciously chose to start a new life without us. It's painful to admit, but we earned that decision by our behavior. Now it's up to us to prove that we've changed. Prove that we have changed. But how do you prove change to someone who doesn't want to see that proof?" I kept looking at the materials on the search page. It turned out that David and Holly were not only looking for me themselves, but had organized an entire campaign. They contacted radio stations, placed ads in newspapers in neighboring states, contacted homeless shelters, hospitals, morgues. They were especially active in looking in cities where I could settle based on my previous interests. Checked out Asheville, North Carolina, since I had once mentioned that I liked the mountains. Explored Savannah, Georgia, because Mary and I spent our wedding anniversary there. Searched small towns in Florida, where many retirees spend their old age. Fortunately, all their searches centered on Ronald Clark. Walter Green was not on their list. They didn't know about the name and ID change. But the most startling discovery was a video that David posted in early October, a 10-minute clip of him sitting in our old house in Memphis, the same one I sold after Mary's death. It turned out that the new owners had allowed him to film the address in the place where my David's childhood was spent. "Daddy," he said, looking into the camera, I'm sitting in the house where you raised me. This is where you taught me how to ride my bike in the backyard. This is where we played baseball in the backyard. It's where Mom cooked our favorite meals and you helped me with my math homework." His voice shook, and I could see the emotion was genuine. "I remember every room in this house. Your study where you worked in the evenings. The garage where we made birdhouses. The kitchen where you made me hot chocolate when I was sick. It was the home of a loving family, Dad, and you were the heart of that family." He stood up and walked through the rooms, recounting the memories associated with each corner. "Here's the staircase where you took my picture on the first day of school every year. Here's the living room where we watched soccer on Sundays. Remember how you explained the rules of the game to me? How you cheered when our team won?" At the end of the video, he sat down in front of the camera again. "Dad, I know I was a bad son after Mom died, but those years when we were a family, they were real. Your love was real. And I want to get back what I lost through my own stupidity. Please give me a chance. Give us a chance to be a family again." Watching that video made me cry, not with emotion, but with bitterness. All of these memories were true. We really were a happy family when David was a child and then a teenager. We had traditions, shared interests, closeness, but that was in the past. After Mary died, David became a different person, or perhaps he had always been that way. It was just that Mom was good at maintaining the appearance of closeness. As an adult, David didn't need his father. He had built his own life and didn't want to share it with an elderly parent. Now, having lost me, he remembered his childhood years and thought he could get that time back. But time doesn't come back. A 38-year-old successful computer programmer is not the same boy who built birdhouses with me. The next day, I called Patricia. I needed to know more about their last visit. "Ronald, it's good of you to call," she said. "I have something important to tell you." "What?" "David left me a letter. He said to tell you if I contacted you. Do you want me to read it?" I said yes, but I hesitated. The letter might contain something that would shake my resolve. Patricia began to read. "Dear Dad, I am writing this letter not knowing if it will reach you, but if it does, I want to say a few important things. First, I understand why you left. I was a terrible son. After Mom died, instead of supporting you, I withdrew into myself. All I thought about was work, my career, my own problems. You'd reach out and I'd turn away. You offered companionship and I made excuses. You gave love and I responded with indifference." Patricia paused. "Shall I go on?" "Yes," I said. "Second, I want you to know that those years when we were a real family meant everything to me. You were the best father imaginable, patient, loving, wise. You taught me to be a man not by words but by example. All the best in me comes from you and my mom." The words hit the mark. David remembered well the kind of father I was. It made his subsequent behavior even more painful. Third, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve to be forgiven. I just want you to know that I've changed. These months of searching have taught me a lot. I've learned what it means to lose the most important person in my life. I've learned that success in my job means nothing without my family around. I realized that I was without an anchor in my life. Patricia continued to read, and I listened and realized that David was sincere. His remorse was real. But was it sufficient? Dad, if you ever decide to come back, know this. I'm willing to accept whatever terms you want. If you want to see me once a month, fine. If you want us to move closer to you, we'll do that. If you need time to forgive us, we'll wait. I just want to have a father again. The letter ended by asking for any sign of life. Even if you don't want to date, just let me know you're alive and well. That's all I ask. After Patricia finished reading, we fell silent. What do you think? She finally asked. I think he's sincere, I answered. But sincerity doesn't always mean you can fix things. Ronald, I'm not going to force you to do anything. But he's really changed. You can see that this quest has changed him. Maybe. But how long will that change last? What would happen if I came back and in 6 months or a year, David was back to work and taking me for granted again? In the evening, I walked around Asheville and reflected on the letter I had read. David was offering me my return on my terms. But what could those terms be? Weekly phone calls? Monthly meetings? Holidays together? All of these things could work as long as the novelty of the situation kept him motivated. But what happens when the novelty wears off? When rebuilding a relationship becomes routine rather than dramatic? I returned home with a clear realization. David's letter hadn't changed my mind. It only confirmed that I had made the right choice. Walter Green was free of that emotional swing, of having to prove his worth as a father over and over again. I had a new life, a new relationship, a new understanding of what a real family is. And I wasn't about to sacrifice that for the possibility of being disappointed again by people who had already shown me once that they didn't need me. It was a snowy December in Asheville. I sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea and watched the flakes falling outside the window. Tomorrow was Christmas, and I was expected to have a holiday dinner at Henry's with friends from the literary club. It was a family I'd chosen on my own. The phone rang. Patricia, as usual, with big news. "Ronald, Holly came to see me, alone, without David. She looked awful. Thin, pale, red eyes. What did she want?" "She brought a box of presents you'd given them over the years. Said she couldn't look at them anymore. And she left a letter." I hesitated but asked to read it. Patricia began. "Dear Papa Ronald, I never called you Daddy in my lifetime, even though you deserved it. I realize now what a fool I was." Her voice trembled. "You tried to be a father to me. You gave me gifts, asked me about my job, invited me to family dinners. And I built a wall. I thought I didn't need another father. How wrong I was." The letter continued. Holly analyzed her behavior in detail, recalling how I'd chosen gifts, pearl earrings for her birthday, perfume of the fragrance she'd mentioned in passing. Each gift was an act of caring, and she saw them as a commitment. "We're willing to move to any city, live by any rules. Just give us the opportunity to be a family," the letter ended. She was absolutely shattered, Patricia said. Said David was depressed, that they had gone to a marriage counselor. "Tell Holly I got her letter and understood her." "That's it? That's it for now." Holly's letter was more honest than the previous ones. She didn't make excuses. She just accepted responsibility. But that didn't change my mind. It wasn't about whether they were remorseful enough. It was about whether I didn't need their remorse anymore. In 8 months, I had built a new life. Walter Green was a complete man with his own interests and friends. To return to the role of Ronald Clark would mean becoming dependent on David and Holly's moods again. The next day, Christmas Day, I woke up early. On the kitchen table were gifts for friends, books for Henry, a scarf for Eleanor. Simple gifts for people who would appreciate them. Eleanor came over to bake a pie at my house. "You know, Walter," she said, "loving our children shouldn't make us unhappy. If we suffer in our relationships with our own children, something is going wrong. How did you come to that conclusion?" After my husband died, I waited 2 years for my children to spend more time with me. And then I thought, what if I built a life so that I could be happy regardless of their decisions? Her words resonated with my experience. At Henry's, 8 people were gathered around the table. The conversation was lively, discussing books, plans for the new year. At that table, I realized definitively, this was my real family. People who chose to be around me not out of obligation, but because they enjoyed my company. Tom showed me the photos from the exhibition. "Walter, you found your style. Your work tells how a new life sprouts in the place of old." In the evening, I returned home with a sense of completeness, sat down at the table and wrote the last letter in Ronald Clark's life. "Dear David and Holly, I have received your letters and accept your apologies, but forgiveness does not mean I am ready to return. During your time of indifference, I've learned, family is a choice. You chose to live without a father, and I respect that choice. Now I choose to live without a son and daughter-in-law who only realized my worth after my loss. I'm not angry. I just don't need your relationship anymore. I have my own life, friends, plans. I am happy without the need to prove my worth to anyone. Live happily, but live it without me. Ronald Clark." Sealed the letter. "I'll send it to Patricia tomorrow. It'll be the last thing Ronald Clark ever does, and Walter Green will continue to live a full, interesting, free life. He has a solo exhibition, new courses, traveling with Henry. He has a home, a town, friends. Most importantly, he has peace. He doesn't wait for calls that may not come, doesn't schedule appointments that might get canceled. He just lives, and that's enough to be happy." Outside the window, the snow continued to fall. A new year will bring new opportunities. Walter Green will meet them with an open heart. Ronald Clark was a thing of the past, along with his unfulfilled hopes. Now he knew that true happiness didn't depend on other people. It depends on the ability to appreciate what you have and not waste your life waiting for something that may never be.